Welcome back to another episode of the Varsity Voices, where the spotlight shines brightest on the gridiron and beyond. In this episode, we're diving a bit into the national conversation. How does the Chicago Catholic League stack up against the top high school football conferences in the country? From California's Trinity League to Philly's Catholic Powers, we break it all down. Plus, we'll shift gears into a topic reshaping the future of high school sports. The latest updates on legislation in Illinois regarding right to play and student athlete transfers statewide. Stay tuned, and we'll be right back.
All of your real estate.
Welcome back to the Varsity Voices, part of the Varsity Voices Media Network, where we talk high school sports, the Chicago Catholic League, and everything in between. Please like, subscribe, and follow wherever you are listening from. And don't forget to follow us on social media as well. I'm one of your hosts, Joe Frevoletti, and with me is your other host, Dan Frevoletti. And Dan, the Chicago Catholic League is widely regarded as one of the premier high school football conferences in the nation, especially, when you consider its combination of tradition, consistent state championship success, elite talent development, national recognition. We've got to say that the Chicago Catholic League, Dan, has got to be up there in the conferences across the country. Wouldn't you think?
Absolutely. I know when we've talked to coaches, they will talk a lot about how tough the conference is. We've talked about getting Catholic Leagued, and during the season and taking a tough loss against a really good team, and just the number of players that are going on to play high level football after high school. It is clearly one of the best and deepest conferences in the country. But, I'm excited about this conversation, Joe, to see kind of where our research has led to where the Chicago Catholic League ranks, within the country, and to, there's a ton of variables, and that's going to depend on some of the different rankings we've seen, but it's there's no doubt about it's one of the best conferences in the country. The coaches call it the SEC of Illinois. So there's no doubt it's a great conference.
Yeah, and when you look at some of the rankings that are out there with some of the publications, whether it be Max Preps, whether it be High School Football America, some of the others, I don't think they give the Chicago Catholic League enough credit as far as the conference is concerned and where they rank, because in my research, if I look at this and rank the Chicago Catholic League, I am putting them in the top 10 in the nation for me, Dan, and it's based on a lot of different things. But some of the, supposed experts out there, or the sites with their particular algorithms and how they rank particular teams and conferences, they don't put the Chicago Catholic League up there nearly as high as you or I would. So
yeah, and it's all about, Joe, how they measure it. In my opinion, I think that there's different ways to look at it, right? If you have, anything can be biased, right? If you have certain ways of putting information in your algorithm, that's going to do one thing. If you've got other variables that go into an algorithm, that's going to produce something else. So it's interesting to see what some of the algorithms spit out and where the Chicago Catholic League fits versus maybe kind of the scout's eye, or thinking of, just looking at what you're seeing on the field and how that measures up versus what happens after high school and how many of the players from a specific conference go on to play high level football, Power 4 football. How many of those players end up in the NFL? So I think it all can be taken. I don't know if with a grain of salt is the best way to say it, but it all has to be taken, in light of that there's different ways of measuring how good a conference is.
Right. And I think that when I look at a lot of the different rankings from a conference standpoint and from a individual team standpoint nationally, what kind of comes down to when I look at it is that a lot of these conferences are ranked by the particular teams in the conference and where those individual teams are ranked nationally. So say, for example, the Trinity League, who I don't know if anybody will disagree with, that that's the best league or conference within the country, considering the teams that are in there. You've got Mater Dei, you've got St. John Bosco, you've got Servite, you've got Orange Lutheran. I mean, just up and down the top 6 or 7 teams are really top notch. I almost think they're a bit of an outlier. They're that good. But I think you need to take into account more than just, especially for some of these other conferences that fall kind of behind the Trinity League. I think you need to take into account more than just where a particular school is ranked nationally, what that means for saying that conference is better or top 10 versus some other conference in the country.
Yeah. The interesting thing was that when we both looked at this and both did some separate research and had some folks looking at it, there wasn't one of these publications, internet sites, whatever you want to say that didn't have Trinity League in California as the number one conference.
Right. Yeah.
I think you found something, and there's the transitive property is always dangerous in football, as I beat you and I beat you and I beat you, so therefore I'm the national champion. I beat you and they beat them and they beat them. So right. You can really play games with that if you want. However, when every single publication out there says the Trinity League is the top conference, and when we all know the schools, when they mention them, it's like, oh yeah, they are. I have heard of them. I have seen them. One of the things about these rankings, Joe, is that do they get national coverage? Yes. This conference gets national coverage, and we all know Mater Dei, St. John Bosco, like you said, Servite, Orange Lutheran. I mean, there's a ton that have played on ESPN, and those of us that like to watch, any high school football game anytime have seen these teams play on ESPN. And I think, really quick, Joe, just to kind of put it in perspective, you found an interesting transitive property, right? That we talked about a little bit. I think you should share that just to give people an idea of how good this conference is.
Right. So you know how I like to do that, Dan, right?
Oh, yeah. That's your thing.
Yeah. 1A plus B equals C, and then minus D, all of that.
Yes.
So Mount Carmel, for people, I'm sure people who listen and follow Chicago Catholic League, Mount Carmel played the Hun for the first game of the year. That's a team from New Jersey. Outstanding team, right? We watched that game, and it was
ridiculous.
A great game. Great game. Yeah, Mount Carmel was right there with them, but ended up losing to the Hun. When I was doing a little bit of research, I saw the Hun played St. Francis, I believe, who is in the Trinity League that we just mentioned, and I think finished 6-5 in the Trinity League last year.
All right, 6-5 in the Trinity League. Okay.
Yes, and St. Francis beat the Hun. I think the score might have been 35-7. Just trounced them.
Whoa.
Just trounced them. Yeah. But then, I did a little bit of deeper digging, right? And one of the other teams that's always mentioned in the top 10 in the country is IMG Academy in Florida, right? You've heard of them.
Oh, yeah. Everyone's heard of them. Yep.
Everyone's heard of them.
JJ went there his last year. Yep.
JJ went there. Yeah. The Hun went and played IMG Academy, and they trounced them. They beat them by 25 points, I think. So like you just mentioned earlier, you have to take some of these things with a grain of salt, right? Because, first of all, it's really hard to tell how good teams are, until you start to look at some of the other teams they play, and that's where strength of the schedule comes in. But then you look at some of the common opponents, right? And you do that transitive properties, as you mentioned, and it really makes you wonder, how good are these teams, and what does that mean for other teams or other conferences across the country, like the Chicago Catholic League?
Yeah, I think it's amazing. And Joe, I think if you have one thing that sticks out to me, and this is a measuring point for one of the research places that you and I both looked, one thing that jumped off the page to me with the Trinity League. The point that it made was that there are dozens of NFL players every year that are in this league. I have a hard time getting my head around that. Dozens in the NFL.
Yeah, we've got to watch some of their games this coming year, because I've thought the same thing. I thought, how good must these teams be? And how talented are the players on some of these teams, especially in the Trinity League? I mean, we see talent week in and week out from the games that we watch in the Chicago Catholic League. We see great talent. But I'm wondering, how much better is the talent in the Trinity League than the Chicago Catholic League or some of these other conferences across the country that have these great reputations, like the Philadelphia Catholic League, the Greater Catholic League in Ohio, the Washington Catholic Athletic Conference. Is there a theme there, Dan, with Catholic? Did I say Catholic a lot?
Every single time.
Right. But just think about some of the teams there, in all those conferences. You've got, DeMatha, you've got Moeller, you've got St. Joseph's Prep, you've got LaSalle, college, high school. I mean, just perennial powers. But, the Trinity League seems to be in a league of its own at this point. Yeah.
When you and I played, and in that era, I remember thinking Cincinnati Moeller, yes, must be ridiculous, right? They had players, that just seemed to go all over. They were nationally recognized. Chris Spielman, I remember being like, wow, this program must be loaded. And that's one guy. And they may have had one or two guys a year, that was like that. They might have had a run of 3 or 4 years with a guy, but these schools just must be, in this conference must be just loaded with players that you don't even realize didn't get national recognition, but they're absolute studs and find their way to the NFL. And that was just something that phrase dozens was eye-opening to me that played in the NFL. But Joe, that's not the only measure, right? So that was one website that took that into account. And we looked up other things that where the Catholic League starts to rise. And, I don't know, what did you see about the Catholic League, the Chicago Catholic League, because they're all Catholics, that made it special?
Well, here's a couple of things that I looked at and I researched, Dan. And to me, by looking at these things versus just some of the individual teams in the conference and how they seem to do. But when you look at the Chicago Catholic League, first of all, you've got to look at the, championship pedigree, right? You've got Mount Carmel, you've got Loyola, you've got Joliet Catholic, you've got Brother Rice, St. Rita, Marist. I mean, when Nazareth, of course. And this year you had another state champion in DePaul Prep, Montini as well. So when you start to look at the conference as a whole, which is where I started with this, I wanted to know the best conferences nationally, from kind of top to bottom. And I think when you look at it that way, obviously Trinity is there, right? Because their top 6 or 7 teams are really, top 20 nationally ranked. But, I think when you look at it top to bottom, you've got to put the Chicago Catholic League up there, top 10 minimum, maybe even top 5, because you look at the state champions that come out of this conference, you look at the strength of schedule, which is another thing that everybody likes to measure. And we all know how the strength of schedule in the Chicago Catholic League from top to bottom is really, really tough. You look at the type of talent that comes out of the Chicago Catholic League and where they end up going to play at college. Dozens of Power 5 recruits, if not more. Look at the coaching It's another aspect, Dan. And we know the coaching has changed a little bit over the past few years now with kind of more higher profile, ex-pro players, ex-NFL players who are now coaching within the Chicago Catholic League. And this is after some of the legendary coaches that were in the Chicago Catholic League, like Frank Lenti and who's the guy from Providence? I can't think of his name right now, but you've had some really legendary coaches who've turned out high-profile players. Chicago, always a recruiting hotbed. Within nationally, it's got to be top 5, top 6 as far as areas that are being recruited. Obviously, Florida, Georgia, Texas, some of those, but Chicago has got to be right up there as well. And the Chicago Catholic League has probably the majority of those top players. And you've got the national recognition, just not quite at the level that some of these other schools are at, but you've got Loyola Academy that's been in the national rankings. Mount Carmel has been in the national rankings. I would argue that some of the other Chicago Catholic League teams should have been in there as well. They just don't maybe have quite the reputation yet. So I think all those things combined, and if you're looking at it from a conference standpoint, from top to bottom, the Chicago Catholic League has got to be up there, in my opinion, top 5 nationally.
When you just said something right near the end that I want to highlight, and that is top to bottom. I think the depth. Now there are 24 teams, so we can't just discount that if we count the whole conference. Top to bottom, the depth in the conference is outstanding.
Right. Yep.
And the fact that there are state championship winners in several divisions on a yearly basis speaks to that depth, right? So if you were to now, you can't really just combine it. I mean, maybe you can because there are divisions within it, but they mix. It's not like they stay within their own division. You mentioned Mount Carmel and Loyola, and that the measuring stick that we saw about producing college talent. This produces many Big Ten level talents is something I saw as one of the highlights of the Chicago Catholic League, and the fact that they've got this deep pool of competition that they have to play against is a big deal. So we researched a lot of this stuff, and I don't know, what's the highest you saw him, Joe, ranked? Did you see him in the top 5?
Not in any of the national publications, but as far as some of the criteria that I just gave you.
Yeah.
For me, and I put it in my own algorithm, right? As far as those things are concerned, and that puts the Chicago Catholic League in the top 5 in the country. And I don't think that's a stretch. I really don't. I mean, it puts them, like we said, Trinity League is up there probably on its own, but when you start getting to that next tier at a national level, whether you're talking about the Philadelphia Catholic League or the UCAC, which is the DC metro area, you've got the Greater Catholic League in Cincinnati, Ohio, which includes Moeller and some of the other schools, but I think from that standpoint, Chicago Catholic League has got to be right there.
Yeah, I agree. And you named some great conferences with some great schools. The one that kind of jumps out to give people a little bit of reference, Washington Catholic Athletic Conference, the WCAC, includes St. John's, DeMatha, which I associate with basketball because they had the great the Georgetown Feeders back in the day. But the one that jumps out is Gonzaga. And
yeah.
And you know who is from Gonzaga, right?
No, tell me, who's from Gonzaga?
Caleb Williams. Caleb Williams, current Bears quarterback, is from Gonzaga. And while DeMatha might be the biggest name in the conference, these others are definitely gaining on them. And they also will show up on national TV on a pretty regular basis. And the DC area, that Maryland, Virginia area is really drawing a lot of big time schools to come and recruit there. So it is it's interesting, and there are a bunch of great schools. Like I said, each one of these conferences that you mentioned has a school that you've heard of for one reason or another,
Yeah.
right? Even if you're a casual follower of high school football. So when I look at the Philadelphia Catholic League, Roman Catholic, great tradition again in basketball as well.
Yeah.
And they send a million players to the SEC on a regular basis, and they just that division, like Illinois, they dominate the Pennsylvania state playoffs. So I think we all associate, Philadelphia football with some of the best football in the country. So, Philadelphia, Ohio, just has incredible football, and
Yes.
were you an All the Right Moves fan? The movie, Tom Cruise.
I don't think I've ever heard of that movie. I'm kidding. Go ahead. Tell me about it. Yeah.
Just a great high school football movie. Not necessarily for youngsters.
Yeah.
You youngsters
Okay.
out there,
Yeah.
don't necessarily put that on.
All right.
But it is a great high school football movie, and it talks about the and that might be more Pittsburgh, so that's not Philadelphia, so that's more Pittsburgh oriented, which is what you associate, Mike Ditka, Dave Wanstead, there's a lot of Dan Marino. Those are all that area of Pennsylvania, but it's got great football. And for this league to be mentioned as dominating the Pennsylvania high school football championships, it's a big deal because I think those of us around our age would probably associate that with more Pittsburgh than Philadelphia.
Right. Yeah. So one of the things that I think, I don't know, tell me what you think of this, Dan. One of the things that I think holds back the Chicago Catholic League a bit from this kind of national recognition and national prominence is that they haven't really stepped out beyond Illinois, right? Beyond the Chicago Catholic League. I mean, they play tremendous competitive football within the Chicago Catholic League, but they have not necessarily stepped out and gotten that national exposure that some of these other conferences have taken advantage of in a big way. I do think that if I were to look at one school or one team within the Chicago Catholic League that's kind of making those kind of inroads now, I would have to point to Mount Carmel as far as what they're doing. I mean, last year they played the Hun. This coming year, they're going out to Cincinnati. They're going to play Moeller. So I feel like they've got an awareness that, hey, if we want to be known as one of the top schools, top conferences as well within within the United States, we've got to step out a bit and go out and play some of these top schools that are always top 40, 50, 20 ranked within the country. We've got to go play some of those. And I give Jordan Lynch and Mount Carmel a lot of credit for doing that.
Yeah, and it could be the way high school football is going, with some of this stuff, and you might see some of these programs play a more national non-conference schedule, just to kind of dip their toe in the water until something opens up that maybe allows them to still compete but play a more national schedule. I mean, the one school we haven't mentioned, the one school in Illinois that does get national recognition, that does go and play anyone, anywhere, anytime, all gas, no brakes. So the one school that does get that recognition is East St. Louis.
Yeah.
And think for this year, Loyola getting beaten soundly by East St. Louis probably knocks the CCL down a notch.
It does.
Right. And as far as a national point of view, while we both are in agreement that we think it's a top 5 conference in the country, until Loyola went out and won 8A, they got beat easily by East St. Louis. Until someone goes and beats East St. Louis, maybe pretty handily. Now, East St. Louis has lost in the state championship to teams like Cary Grove and some of these other teams, and that have great systems and play really, really disciplined football and option football. So I'm not discounting that. A win is a win. But until the Chicago Catholic League were to go and do that and say, we want to play them every year, they might not get that recognition that vaults them from, website after website into the top 10 nationally on a regular basis.
Right. And I mean, it's not like, if we're talking about nationally and some of the websites and some of the organizations that do these kind of rankings, whether it's teams or conferences, it's not like there's 6 guys sitting around and debating, in detail the different things, right? I mean, they put each of the schools to the test in their algorithm, and they go with what gets spit out, right? So for the Chicago Catholic League, up until now, they haven't fit into that, right? Because exactly for what you just said, East St. Louis just trounces Loyola first game of the year. Loyola loses a couple of games during the season to teams that maybe they should not have lost to. Mount Carmel loses to the Hun, right? Then they end up losing, in the conference schedule to Brother Rice. Nobody knows that Jack Elliott didn't play that game, right? All the algorithm sees is that they lost,
Right.
to this team. So, from our standpoint, we're not taking that into account all that much because we know some of the finer details. But on a national scale, like you just said, they don't know that. It's just, hey, they lost.
Joe, did you ever think when we started this podcast, we'd say algorithm as much as we've said it?
We have said algorithm a lot. That's a sign of the times.
It really is.
Yeah.
It really is. Get used to it, people, because algorithms are going to be everything.
Yes.
You watch over the next several years how the algorithms of Max Preps and whoever else out there start to take hold in determining classes, determining seeds, and people are looking for ways to do things quicker. Algorithm better be part of your regular vocabulary on a daily basis. In the fall.
And I'm not a huge detractor of that.
No, I was going to say, if you were going to say you're not a huge algorithm guy, I was like, come on.
No, I am,
Big algorithm guy.
But you've probably heard me say over the course of the last 8 months since we've been doing this podcast, is there's something to the eye test as well.
Oh, yeah.
That algorithms miss. And I think I would love to see a way to incorporate that. And maybe that is the 6 guys sitting in a room talking about stuff. It's like, okay, the algorithm says this, but we see this watching this team play, week in and week out. So that makes a difference to us. So that's the only thing I would say about that.
Yeah. And I hate to disparage, Brother Rice on beating Mount Carmel in what was an awesome game,
Yes.
but you've got to be a human about it too, and see that, the player of the year, essentially in the conference, doesn't play. So that's going to make a difference.
Yes.
I used to always not bristle. No one's going to do you any favors if you have injuries, right? If you're a coach or if you're a team, injuries can't be an excuse. No, but it can be a reason.
Right.
Right.
Not an excuse, but a reason. Right.
Yeah,
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah. And so, it's you don't have the depth. You don't have the option of Tom Brady and then, he gets hurt. So Jimmy Garoppolo goes in and goes on a run that makes him a starter and a rich guy in the NFL for years on end. You don't have that option in high school, right? You'd like to think maybe you do, but there's only so much time anyway. So yeah, there needs to be an algorithm that spits it out to a group of 6 guys with cigars, talking about what they see on a field on a week in and week out basis.
Yeah. All right. So are we in agreement that we feel the Chicago Catholic League is a top 5 conference nationally?
We are, and we aren't alone. We aren't alone. So we cover it. So we don't want to seem biased, but we both found information that had some rankings, and the one I found that put the CCL the highest was, I don't know if there was anything attributed to it from a citing standpoint, but it had the Washington Catholic Athletic Conference is 5th, the Greater Catholic League of Ohio with Moeller, LaSalle, St. Xavier, Elder as 4th, Philadelphia Catholic League with St. Joe's Prep, LaSalle College, Roman Catholic, which I mentioned is third, and they put the CCL, Chicago Catholic League, as second.
Right.
Which is the highest I found it at. I'm guessing maybe you saw the same thing. And then Trinity, far and away the best one. And so we're not alone. We're not being homers just because we cover it on a week in and week out basis by saying this. There are other people that believe it. Now, being fair, there are others that put it in the best of the rest type of scenario. And that what I just read, I was surprised in that research that in that top 5, something real. There's a few things that jumped out to me. All Catholic, number 1.
Right.
But no Florida, no Texas. So I wonder about that. I'm like, come on, they're Texas. When you look at Division I scholarships out of Texas, they have triple what we do in Illinois.
Right.
Just the vastness of the state. And so there's got to be some conferences in Texas and Florida that are better than what that particular site or information spit out.
You know what I would like to see, Dan, is a national tournament after state playoffs are done.
If we don't get comments on that, I don't know what we'll ever get comments on.
Yeah, I want to extend high school football into February, right? So a national tournament where, I don't know, pick the top 2 ranked teams within each state. So you end up with, let's see, 100 teams, and you play a big old tournament that lasts about 4 or 5 weeks. Of football. And
that would be awesome. It would be awesome.
It would be. Wouldn't you love to see, a Chicago Catholic League team play one of these teams everybody talks about from Texas or California or Florida? I would love to see those matchups. Would love it.
Yeah, let's think for a second how that might work, right? So would the school have to bow out? Let's say you're chosen for that. If you're Loyola or Mount Carmel or Nazareth. Right. And you are chosen as one of these schools that are the top 2 in the state. So, I mean, and then we're throwing out, we'll just say whatever it is. Maybe it's East St. Louis in another one, Lincoln Way East in another one, and a CCL.
Right.
You probably think there have to be a CCL team in there. Number 1, right? It's like, how would that be determined? The IHSA is going to say that it's determined by
the IHSA. They're involved in everything.
Maybe the Varsity Voices can be the determining factor of.
We will come up with a Varsity Voices algorithm, which will determine the top 2 teams within the state of Illinois. Actually,
if there's any super smarty pants out there that are listeners, reach out. If you're an algorithm
guy
or girl,
yeah,
right?
Yes,
yeah. If you know how to make an algorithm, we're going to give you the variables.
Yes. And we'll come up with top 10, right? But we need an algorithm. Now that I think about it, and you were talking about it earlier, we need an algorithm.
Yeah,
just
I like it.
Attributed to us. It's our own algorithm.
Why not?
Yeah, we can do it. Everybody else seems to be doing it.
Yeah. Let's put an algorithm together.
All right. We will do that.
All right. So we've got other things to discuss. So we've got some breaking news, right?
We do. We've got some breaking news, some new news, however you want to look at it, and it's regarding legislation in Illinois we've talked about and pending.
It's a big deal.
Big deal. One piece of legislation is in regards to the right to play, which we talked about in a previous episode. Go back and listen to it. The other is in regards to high school student athlete transfers and the ability for kids to transfer twice during their high school career without any, I don't know, I'll just say any repercussions.
All right, so put on your legislator's bow tie.
Yeah.
And tell us what it's about.
All right. So Right to Play is about kids who are student athletes. I'm not going to say kids, student athletes in high school who are playing in a particular sport, whatever that might be. They would have the ability to compete in outside activities during their particular season that are also related to that particular sport. So you've given the example before, Dan. We'll use football. You're playing in your high school football season, and some national organization, pick one, has decided to put on a all-star game on a Sunday during the season. And certain kids from all the state and different schools have been invited to play in this. Before right to play, that was a no-no. You couldn't do it. If you did it, you were ineligible to continue to compete, on your high school team in that sport. What this says is now you will be able to do it. There's been, at first, the first legislation that was introduced was completely open. There were no limits put on how many different things you could participate in during your season in that same sport, whether it's a 7-on-7 competition, an all-star game, whatever it might be, a showcase type thing. Now, what this legislation says is that a student athlete can do it twice over the course of the year, but they would have to obtain a waiver from both the principal and the athletic director at their high school to allow them to do that.
Your favorite word, waiver.
Waiver. Yeah. How many times are we going to introduce the word waiver in everything that has to do with high school sports? It just drives me nuts. Yeah. But anyway,
so where is it at legislatively, Joe?
Legislatively, that right to play, that has come out of the House and has passed, by a vote. That doesn't mean it's law. What it means is that it goes on then to the Senate, where they will then debate it or whatever they do, review it, and the Senate will then vote as well. If they pass it, then it would go to the governor's office for a signature, and it would become law. So that would be a huge development in Illinois. Now, it's a little bit watered down from the original version, and I'm sure the IHSA had something to do with that, watering that down.
Yeah.
But it does give some of these student athletes a little more flexibility to participate in some of these things, which are important, I think, for them and for their future, for the recruiting, for scholarship opportunities, for NIL, whatever it might be, you name it. But it gives them more opportunities for sure.
Yeah, I'm for the oversight.
I'm not. I'm like, you know what? If he wants to do something every weekend, just let it go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I know. Maybe it's the old coach in me that is worried about someone getting hurt in an all-star game or whatever it might be. But yeah, I am not for the free for all like you are.
Yeah. I think this is a good first step.
It is. It is a good thing. And some of the examples that have been given out there as far as what student athletes have got dinged for are ridiculous.
Yes.
They shouldn't have gotten suspended or whatever, their eligibility taken away. That's silly, but
and we talk about football, and right. You just mentioned, injuries, whatever. As you said, some of the things that have happened in the past. Let's take, for example, that one case with a kid who's a top cross country runner, right? For his high school team, he participates in a charity 5K on Sunday, and the IHSA rules him ineligible. That kind of thing, I think, is ridiculous.
I do too. And, as far as football goes, the one case where I see it being really positive, but I'm worried about even saying it, I'm going to speak it into existence, is a player on a team that is not successful, doesn't have good, but they are supremely talented, has the option to go play a game in a showcase where they can play with other great players where they might not on a weekly basis. I guess I see how it makes sense.
Yeah, they're not going to get exposure on their high school team, right?
Yep.
Think about that kid, and I'm not going to mention any names, any schools, but think about a kid who's not getting any exposure. He's not on a very good team. He goes to some all-star game, national exposure event on a Sunday during the season, and he just lights it up. His opportunities then, increase tenfold, probably.
Right.
So in that case, it's a good thing, right?
Yeah. If you're a wide receiver on an option team,
yes,
right. That's the easiest example I can think of.
Yeah.
That makes a ton of sense for someone to do something like that.
Yeah, exactly. So we will keep track of that as it continues to kind of move through the legislative process in Illinois, and we will make sure we keep you informed and up to date as to if that passes or not. The other piece of legislation which we've talked about before is regarding there was an amendment to a House bill, and the amendment said that essentially it said that high school student athletes could transfer 2 times within their high school career without any ramifications, any repercussions. They stay eligible. Nobody could regulate where they go, when they go, why they go. They could just do it. That piece of legislation seems to be, well, it's essentially stopped at this point because unlike the right to play legislation, this one regarding transfers did not come out of the House, in time with a vote, in order to move it over to the Senate. So, that could mean that it's dead, according to some of the experts that we've talked to.
Yeah.
Or it could mean that somebody, depending on how hard they want to push it, some of the sponsors, co-sponsors, and there's a lot of them since when we first talked about this, Dan. I think it was Representative Camille Lilly, who was the original sponsor. She got another 4 or 5 chief co-sponsors, another 20 sponsors on that bill. But it did not come out of the House. So the only way it can move forward is if it's attached to as an amendment to some other bill, which is moving forward.
So it could be attached to the right to play bill.
There you go. You are thinking just
Varsity
like
Voices civics lessons. Yes.
Right. Yeah. So, I would say that's probably 50-50 at this point. It could just be dead. Maybe the IHSA and high school, maybe they can only handle one thing at a time, so right to play may be it for this legislative session. But no matter what happens with that one, Dan, I don't think it's going to die. If it doesn't get through this year, it's going to be reintroduced next year. As you and I mentioned and talked about on a previous episode, that issue is not going away. It's not going away. And the IHSA is, no matter how hard they try and regulate it and stop it, I just don't think they're going to be able to.
Yeah. What's the Varsity Voices saying? The train
is on the tracks and you cannot stop it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe with that one, maybe the train is just kind of chugging along, and how initially the wheels kind of skid along the tracks until it gains enough momentum and then it gets going. I have a feeling that's probably at that point. The wheels are still turning and skidding on the tracks, but it is a train that's starting to move.
Right. Or it takes a little divergent path.
Yes.
Yeah. It's got to go around
the scenic
Avenue.
It's taking the scenic route. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but we will follow that too, and because it's something of, actually a ton of interest to not only us, but to everybody within high school sports in Illinois and nationally. So that issue, no matter what happens with the legislation, won't go away. We'll continue to kind of track that, and we'll let our listeners know, what's going on with that.
Yeah, we'll stay on top of it. We'll talk to our experts.
Yes. All right. Well, anything else you want to talk about, Dan, or is that good?
No, God, we covered it.
We beat it to death, or
yes.
No? I think we were very informative, Dan, and for all the people who listen, I think they probably know where we're at on some of these things and know what we'd like to talk about and what to cover or what we cover. So I think what we've done is really resonates with some of our listeners. So that's a good thing.
We're less than 2 months to April, May, June. Less than 2 months to summer practices.
Yes, it's coming quick. Yeah, so speaking of that, Dan, we're going to do a for people who need their football fix. We're going to be doing soon on one of our upcoming episodes. We're going to start talking about some of the conference schedules. Right? Or the schedules for the Chicago Catholic League teams.
Right. And some of the early, maybe non-conference games.
Right. And, maybe do a early season prognosticus.
Are they back?
I don't
Is
know.
yours back?
Not yet. I hear the woodpeckers, but I don't hear a prognosticus out there tapping on my window. But
Right. Yeah. Me
yes,
neither. Yeah.
yeah,
They look. They probably are. They're smart. They know that you don't get here until May.
yeah. It's a little early. It's a little
Yeah.
cold. My prognosticus does not like the cold
Right.
at all.
No, mine either.
Yeah. It's much rather stay wherever it's at, where it's warm, and have a drink, and come back when he knows it's not going to be any cold weather, any
Yeah.
snow. Yeah.
Yeah. Yours is like in like Marco Island. That's where I think yours is.
Yeah, might be. We can ask when it comes back and we do our first episode, but we'll make sure to cover that soon. So we give
Yeah, some
everybody.
schedules are out, some aren't. Still, we'll see, or at least some haven't been released publicly. Some are fired up about it. There's some cool ones out there that I've seen. There's some cool early games that people should take note of right away. Put on their calendar.
Yes, absolutely. All right. Well, I want to thank everybody for listening and for tuning in. We appreciate you listening, and make sure that you like, follow, and subscribe wherever you're listening from. Also, you can find us on social media. We're all over social media. We're on X, we're on Facebook, we are on YouTube, we are on TikTok, we are on Instagram. Make sure you check us out there as well. But as always, thank you for listening, and we will talk to you soon.